Why does it matter if the word narcissistic fits or not? Some of you may think, well, this is a big ticket relationship. It's my mom, it's my husband, it's my sister. I need to know so I know what to do. You already know the relationship doesn't feel good, or you wouldn't be asking this question. One piece of feedback I get from people all the time is, isn't narcissistic abuse just the same thing as emotional abuse? So can you please stop making it about narcissism? Or stop making it about the personality of the person engaging in the emotional abuse, or some people say the diagnosis, but we know it's not a diagnosis. Folks say to me, come on, emotional abuse is emotional abuse. Stop this talk about narcissistic abuse. Not so sure that I agree, and I think it's a complicated conversation that comes up a lot. There's something unique about the emotional abuse that unfolds in a narcissistic relationship that makes it quite harmful. Now let's talk in general terms about emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is behaviors in a relationship that are comprised of psychological tactics that leave the other person feeling unsafe in the relationship. This can include frequent insults, threats to leave, threats in general, isolation from other people, playing upon a person's insecurities, fears, vulnerabilities, excessive and typically unfounded jealousy, gaslighting, harassment, blame shifting, emotional withholding, emotional withdrawing, things like the silent treatment is a great example, yelling, cursing that's targeting the person, not just using obscene words like the F word and all that, but targeting the obscenity at the other person. You stupid B word, I can't believe I'm married to such a stupid effing B word, or a stupid effing A word kind of thing. There may be threats of physical violence. Maybe the physical violence never happens, but there'll be threats. And yes, there are cases, again, many cases of emotional abuse where direct physical abuse doesn't happen, but it's always there. It's hanging out there like it could. But there may be things like slam down doors or thrown objects, but the object is not thrown at the other person. It could be something that's thrown on the ground. Now, I hate talking about reasons, but there are lots of reasons a person may engage in behaviors that are interpersonally harmful or unsettling for the other person in the relationship, other people in the relationship. In some cases, it may be what we call episodic factors, short-term passing factors, like somebody being intoxicated, acutely intoxicated, that results in horrible behavior towards other person or people. And that behavior wouldn't happen if the person was not intoxicated. And when they're not intoxicated, they don't behave that way. In some cases, problematic behavior in a relationship could actually be medical. A person's had a head injury or other central nervous system process, like a stroke, that may have caused personality change or some other form of impulsive, disinhibited behavior. Basically, there's some form of damage to the brain. In some cases, it may be because this interpersonally difficult behavior, maybe not all of the things I listed, but some of them, might be happening because somebody's in the throes of an acute mental health crisis, a psychotic episode, like a break from reality, a manic episode, severe dissociation, in which the person's behavior is truly a break from reality, it is a sensory disturbance, and it can show up as interpersonal acting out of all kinds. Now, in these situations, we see the difference, right? The person's not even in reality. And there's, again, all these examples I'm giving, there's a discernible issue. There's intoxication, there's injury, there might be illness, brain damage, or severe mental illness. In those cases, we often won't even call it emotional abuse, even though if there's no change in it, it can feel that way. We might view it related to a person who, again, is in some kind of altered state. These things happen as episodes, and in some cases, there's a fix. The issue could be resolved. For example, sobering up, or there's treatment, for example, for the psychosis or the mania, or perhaps there's neurorehabilitation following a stroke or head injury, or there's support that comes in, or there's recognition of the brain damage that was caused by the injury. It makes sense in a way. Not saying it's easy, but it makes sense. Now, obviously, if these exposures keep happening without change, it can add up. For example, if you're in a relationship with someone who gets intoxicated regularly and behaves abusively every time that they're intoxicated, whether they know what the hell they're doing or not when they're intoxicated, if you are on the regular receiving side of someone's abusive, drunk, or high behavior, that is going to take a toll on you. And over time, if there's no change in that, we probably would put that in the emotional abuse drawer. Now, in other cases, emotionally antagonistic behavior can happen in a person or by a person who is experiencing some symptoms of other mental health issues. People going through post-traumatic reactions, that's a great example, right? People who have been through trauma and are still working that through are continuing to experience trauma responses and patterns, such as sort of emotional flattening in some cases. There might be impulsive shows of anger or other emotion, typically anger. There may be poor frustration tolerance. There may be emotional withdrawal or emotional avoidance of other people. There may be a loss of trust that could come out as jealousy, but it's just a general loss of trust that can feel psychologically harmful to other people in the relationship, right? It can read sometimes to some people as low empathy. It can read as dysregulation. It can read as suspiciousness. Now, here's the thing. In people in post-trauma, you're typically not going to see these stuff like validation seeking, grandiosity, the status seeking, or the entitlement that we see in narcissism. See, there's a difference. But nonetheless, the relationship with someone who's going through post-trauma could be uncomfortable and unpredictable. Many people have had a family member who've gone and had a terrible thing happen and come back. They'll say, this is a different person. Now, antagonistic behavior may come from someone who, for a variety of reasons, may engage in poor emotional attunement, who may be interpersonally abrupt, who may not have any interest in you or other people. There could be inattentiveness. Some people who sort of feel like that relationship doesn't feel safe could be very inattentive. And that can read as low empathy or emotional dysregulation. But again, when narcissism's not around, you're not going to see stuff like entitlement, grandiosity, status seeking, all that stuff. But nonetheless, if somebody's constantly not attuned to you, the relationship can feel empty and cold and as though the other person doesn't care. It can at times feel unpredictable, if they're abrupt, it can feel hurtful. Antagonistic behavior can and does happen also in relationships, as I said, gave the intoxication example, but it can happen in people who are also living long-term with addiction. And it can show up as unpredictability in moods and emotions, selfishness, lots of emotional dysregulation, shifting of blame, rationalization, denial, manipulation, and in some cases even entitlement and victimhood. Now again, in many of these cases, if you've gone through it, you may not call it emotional abuse per se, some of you may have, but you may find that until you fully understand what may be happening for the other person, and once you do, that might change it, but until you understand that, you go through these relationships feeling unseen, oftentimes on edge and hypervigilant, ruminating about what you could do to make it better, wondering what you're doing wrong, feeling tense. And you may also be feeling bad because once you realize that they are going through something, you might feel bad for feeling angry at them and saying, like, they're going through something real. They're going through post-traumatic stress. They're going through addiction, but I'm also not enjoying what this relationship has become. And it gets into this really uncomfortable dichotomy that their behavior is actually really difficult on you. And yes, they are going through something. It's that and it makes it very hard. It gets to be that cognitive dissonance. Now, in some cases, people behave in ways that feel unsafe and unpleasant and angering in relationships because they're simply unhappy. They're malcontented. Life didn't go the way that they wanted it to, right? Their experiences of life as unfair. And perhaps it really was unfair to them. However, they may not have all the stuff that's narcissistic, right? They may not be grandiose. They may not be entitled. They may not be attention-seeking, right? But their misery has drowned out their empathy. And all of that said, this can also be a person, over time, be a person who behaves in these invalidating, hurtful, mean-spirited ways in a relationship. And it just feels really heavy. That said, again, these relationships with these kind of malcontented, sort of always, life isn't what I wanted, may not have that Machiavellian strategy two-faced quality. Everyone may just see this person as kind of a heavy, hard to connect with, maybe even at times sort of miserable person. but not necessarily as emotionally abusive. Now, I hope you're still with me because this is complicated, but this next part is important. And here's the key point. If the person in your life or people in your life who are behaving in a way that may sometimes feel mean or invalidating or antagonistic or combative or manipulative, has these other things going on we're talking about, just they've had a tough life or PTSD or depression or addiction, it's very, very likely that they're behaving like this with just about everyone they encounter. It's not selective. Now, the closer you are to a person going through these things, the more likely you're going to see it more because you see more of their behavior. But if someone else is around, they're going to see it too. This isn't just happening behind closed doors. There is a good chance in these circumstances, other members of your family will see it, right? That your friends might see it, that their colleagues might see it. People around, just people that you only see from time to time, see it. And you see other people who may be experiencing the fallout of their behavior as well. Now, people are on the fence if this would qualify as emotional abuse per se, if indeed somebody's interpersonally difficult behavior is happening because of these other existing issues, right? And especially if this person's not being tactical. Again, not only behaving like this towards you, but then being charming with other people. And in these cases, when in these other things, post-trauma and all of that, there may be accountability after the difficult behavior. Now, but nonetheless, these patterns do take a toll over time, and therapy and other support is still needed. If someone is in a relationship where these patterns are unfolding, for example, they're with somebody who every time they get drunk, they're an angry drunk. Now, this emotionally problematic behavior, though, in these cases may not be calculated. Like I said, it may not be tactical. It may not be designed to hurt that most vulnerable part of you. It may be part and parcel of their symptomatology or their history or other stuff that's going on with them or even a medical cause. But you may still slowly get worn out from being in a relationship that is, frankly, not always healthy or even not even feel psychologically safe, especially if you have no support, education, or understanding of what's going on. Now, many people have successfully navigated relationships such as these where there were difficult behaviors, there were difficult patterns, because the person engaging in the difficult behavior may have been behaving in this manner that doesn't always feel safe. But the person who's behaving in the difficult manner may seek out help, may be willing to reflect on how their behavior is affecting other people. And together with professional support and professional help, you probably can't do this on your own, you may be able to find strategies to manage it to the betterment of everyone without a lot of defensiveness. Now, when other people are also experiencing the fallout of someone else's difficult behavior and seeing what you're seeing and perhaps experiencing what you're experiencing, it feels different. It's still difficult, but it feels different. You may still feel sad or guilty or hurt and conflicted because the behavior does hurt and it is difficult. And you may also understand more of the why, which helps. Most people do and will even feel terrible at labeling it as a problem. Family member with post-trauma is behaving difficult. They're like, I feel bad about this. But you want to view it more as the fallout of a mental health issue or some other issue. And that is compassionate and that is true. We can understand what is happening in these situations and perhaps not only not personalize it, because it might be happening to other people too, but maybe recognize that there are going to be limitations here in this relationship, that this isn't personal, and that this person is struggling with something very real too. And in many of these cases, not all, but in many, intervention is a very real option, whether it's therapy, individual groups, family, social skills training, medication, or even education. For example, we see a lot of family education that happens for when someone in the family has dementia. These programs exist and they're very good. But what we can see is that things can be managed and we can support the people also being affected on both sides. In addition, in most of these cases, sometimes even without treatment, after the triggered moment passes, where there might be a lot of anger or rage or hurtful words, there may be some attempt at accountability where a person says, I am so sorry. I was triggered. That wasn't okay. and I'm sorry, but they don't shift the blame on the other. Now that can help to a point. It doesn't always help if it keeps happening over and over again. You keep getting apologies, but at least you're not getting blamed. But you may see that there is some awareness, and again, with treatment, that these patterns could be addressed. Okay, so all of that said, now let's go back to narcissism, because this is where the emotional abuse piece really does come in. And I understand why people say, well, why don't you just call it emotional abuse? Because narcissistic abuse is something different. Where narcissism results in something difficult, from the difficult behaviors and interpersonal unpleasantness and even the toxicity that can come from other situations, is that in narcissistic relationships, it feels more strategic. It feels more tactical. It feels more aware. There are two key elements that make narcissistic emotional abuse very different from many other forms of interpersonally difficult and exhausting, unhealthy, and even unsafe patterns that we may observe in other kinds of relationships. Here's the two things. First, the capacity for the narcissistic person to turn it on and off. And second, the blame shifting as a central theme. In all the other situations I was describing earlier in this video, for example, a partner who may be an addict or have post-trauma, have post-traumatic reactions, and who may keep engaging in patterns that leave the relationship feeling psychologically unsafe or invalidating or empty. While it can sometimes seem inconsistent, for example, the pattern may be worse when the partner who's behaving sort of in a difficult way is triggered or intoxicated. Once it begins, if you happen to be in front of other people, it's going to happen in front of those other people. There is not that thing that happens that we see, for example, in the partner or the children or the people closest to the narcissistic person, of this emotionally abusive behavior almost always happening behind closed doors or after other people are no longer around, right? This is a unique element of narcissistic abuse. And as a result, there might be a lot of people around you when you're in a narcissistic relationship who may think like, we had such a great time with all of you tonight. What are you saying? I've never had any trouble with him. Or, wow, your mom is so sweet. She's so warm. She's so nice. Or, gosh, you're so lucky you work with him. You're so lucky to have him as your manager. This is our most profitable division. You must be doing amazing things. So when that happens, you feel upside down, gaslighted, confused, and unsupported, which can leave you feeling even worse and less likely to be able to make sense of what the hell is happening to you. Then there is that blame shifting. This is one of the most nefarious aspects of narcissistic abuse. Not only are you enduring constantly unhealthy and manipulative and unsettling and dishonest and, again, uncomfortable dynamics, you're blamed for them. This is in contrast to other cases of what can at times feel like an unhealthy relationship. All the different reasons and ways emotionally unhealthy patterns can show up, right? It's the impulsive stuff, the emotionally dysregulated stuff, the emotionally disconnected stuff, day after day after day after day, that takes the toll, right? If there's no change and it keeps happening day after day, you really do feel like just is unrelenting. However, in most of those cases, blame shifting may not be the norm. The bad thing may happen in the relationship, and certainly that doesn't feel good. But when it's not narcissism, in general, you may not be blamed for it. In narcissistic relationships, or any relationship with someone with an antagonistic personality, you will be blamed for their behavior. They will blame you. They will blame you for their rage, for their anger, for their impulsivity, for their dysregulation, for their betrayal, or they will punish you with their silent treatment. The emotional abuse of narcissistic relationships makes the other person in the narcissistic relationship feel like a bad person. While the unhealthy patterns that we observe that can happen in other relationships where narcissism's not on board, that may feel emotionally uncomfortable, may feel more depleting and exhausting and demoralizing. When the blame shifting happens, the exhaustion, the demoralizing, it's horrible. There is a difference, right? And narcissistic relationships are depleting, exhausting, and demoralizing. And you feel like, and you're told, you slowly believe, that not only are you to blame, but that you have utterly lost the plot because you are one of the only people who sees it or feels this way about this person. And everyone's saying like, well, aren't you lucky you know them? The final layer to this is when narcissism and another psychological issue happen together. And both of these things now are contributing to the unhealthy emotional behavior. For example, there's a narcissistic person who's depressed, or a narcissistic person who's also living with addiction, or a narcissistic person that might have very impulsive ADHD. That's really difficult because you as the person in the relationship may really be enduring full-on emotional abuse and be told that their impulsive, hurtful, harmful, invalidating, unsettling, unsafe behavior is because of that other thing, because of the ADHD, because of the addiction, and that you just need to be patient. And you may, because you might think, okay, once their post-traumatic stress or their ADHD or their addiction is addressed, then everything will be better. No. The narcissism will mean that the narcissistic piece of the emotional abuse will persist. And even if the person living with addiction becomes sober, or the person living with depression, or the person with post-traumatic stress has received good treatment, because the narcissism is there, they may continue to blame their behavior on you or that other thing that they experienced. I know I went through therapy, but I'm always going to get triggered because I have PTSD and you aren't patient enough with me. You're a terrible person for even making this about me. See what I'm saying? It's the toughest 1-2 punch because you may believe that you are a bad person and you owe it to them to be patient with their ongoing abusive behavior. That when they blame you, it feels plausible. You do have empathy for them, but you're also being told you can't do anything right. And at the same time, you're enduring their entitlement, their arrogance, their victimhood, their anger, their selfishness. And you also continue to blame yourself even more. You blame yourself for not being understanding. And you're also being blamed by them, for their own abusive behavior. That's one that people suffer with deeply. Narcissistic emotional abuse is different. That's why we talk about it differently. The harm to the person in a narcissistic relationship is often far deeper because there's a disconnect between your experience with them and how the world feels about them, and even a disconnect between how some days are in the relationship and other days are in the relationship. It's between how you see the narcissistic person behave with you and how they behave with other people, because you're blamed for all the bad things that happen, because you've seen what you feel could be possible in this relationship, and you believe that if you were just different, then the relationship would be better. Because the narcissistic person may be, in some cases, quite successful in the world. Not always, but they can be. They can be awful behind closed doors. And so you really can get fully enveloped in the idea that it has to be you that's the problem. And the fact is, while we can have empathy and more of a roadmap to understand why someone may show up in a way in a relationship that isn't always healthy or doesn't always feel safe or connected or kind. When a person consistently behaves in an antagonistic, invalidating, unsafe way in a relationship, regardless of the cause, it's going to take a toll on you, okay? Regardless of the why, right? We do put a lot of effort into thinking about why a person who's behaving in a way in a relationship that's not healthy, that might be unconnected or disconnected or cold or invalidating, we do spend a lot of time thinking about their why. What we don't spend enough time reflecting on is what it does to the other person in the relationship. But for those of you, perhaps, who have endured both of these types of different kinds of emotionally difficult relationships, I know you know the difference. While the challenging dynamics you may have encountered with a partner or a family member or a friend or even a colleague whose behavior may have been a byproduct of other psychological factors or even, medical issues or something that were not related to the unique personality dynamics of narcissism or antagonism, you know that even in those cases, it wasn't always easy, but that you understood it. You might have really understood the why of it. Other people saw it and understood it. And you were able to develop a realistic sense of the limitations and stand on that razor's edge of compassion and what was happening in the relationship. But narcissistic relationships are even more limited. And yet, because of all that inconsistent narcissistic stuff, great in the morning, abusive by the evening, fun on the weekend, a nightmare on Tuesday, charming at the work dinner, cruel on the car ride home. Because of all of that, we really think it has to be us. And it can, as a result, be hard to actually see the limitations because so many other people don't. So no, not all emotionally unhealthy relationship dynamics are created the same or look the same. There's commonalities, but they're not the same. And navigating a narcissistic relationship is an entirely different beast. And trust me, folks, I say this not just from years of witnessing this in clinical practice and in research, but also personally. And when both narcissism and another dynamic are together and at play, the experience of narcissistic abuse can feel even more confusing. So, once upon a time, nobody really cared about narcissism. And now, every minute of every day, there's a new video, a new reel, a new TikTok, a new blog post about it. This is actually a good thing, and it's also a bad thing. The good thing is that awareness is at levels I couldn't have even imagined 20 years ago. The bad thing is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. And since it's the internet, there's also a lot of what I can call contrarian stuff. People saying that this narcissism stuff isn't true, that it can change, that everyone is being unfair to people who are narcissistic, that there's no such thing as narcissistic supply, that narcissism can definitely change, that it's merely a form of neurodivergence. Okay, so here's the deal. Let's flip the narrative. I'm not going to stop talking about narcissism. The framework and understanding the behaviors and the healing that can take place after a relationship where these patterns happen, it's too important and too many people are hurt by it for me to stop talking about it. I know what narcissism is. It's a lot more subtle than can be communicated in a simple way. And I also know a lot of people get it wrong. And they waste more time trying to figure out whether or not their partner or their parent or their friend or whoever the heck it is narcissistic than they do on focusing on the patterns in the relationship and what these patterns in the relationship are doing to them. When I ask people, why is the whole are they narcissistic thing so important to you? People will say to me, I need to know so then I know it's real and that it's not going to change and that I'm seeing this clearly. My favorite theory that was shared recently is that all narcissism is actually ADHD, and that people with ADHD need to have arguments to get dopamine. I just smiled politely when I heard this theory. I have talked about the whole overlap between ADHD and narcissism thing before on this channel. There's a lot of overlap between the two. So something's clearly going on, but they're also clearly not the same thing. I have met and worked with plenty of people who have clinically significant attentional deficits who also have perfectly fine empathy and in fact can be quite apologetic and self-aware about the challenges that their attentional flip-flopping is raising for other people. Now, that's not what we would see in someone who's narcissistic. By definition, a person with ADHD, for example, is not going to be entitled. Now, if both narcissism and ADHD are overlapping, then sure. But a person with ADHD wouldn't have the defensive posture that would lead them to walk around and believe that they're special and that they deserve special treatment and that other people don't deserve that special treatment. People with ADHD don't need excessive praise and validation and don't get angry when they don't get it. The biggest overlaps between ADHD or the most confusion can often be seen in what looks like selfishness, which really isn't selfishness in ADHD, as much as it is often sort of an impulsive over-focus to, or behaviorally them sort of reacting to what's right in front of them. And that could be to the detriment of focusing on what other people are doing or saying and what those other people may need. However, in the absence of narcissism, a person with ADHD would be able to hear like, hey, that's not cool. You can't just be doing you and you doing you and walking away from a conversation. Maybe the person with ADHD would experience some embarrassment, maybe some frustration, but would not be blaming you for it. The inattentiveness that we see in ADHD can also look like selfishness or simply in not being interested in you because they're interrupting you, or they may change the subject, or they may fool with their phone or fidget while you are talking. All of that stuff, which can feel rude, can code to narcissism. But again, if they don't have the other narcissistic stuff, then it is very likely that's the ADHD, and it may not be easy, for example, to have a heavy conversation with them with all of their fidgeting, but it doesn't feel interpersonally invalidating per se. But saying that all narcissism is simply neurodivergence in the form of ADHD, not so much. People with ADHD are not manipulative because of their ADHD. That's just not how it works. Then there are the folks who maintain that narcissism, again, is merely a post-traumatic state, something else I've talked about on this channel. And some of the patterns we see in narcissism are consistent, yes, with some post-traumatic patterns, including the variance between, going back and forth, I should say, between being emotionally dysregulated, and that can even look like rage, and then being emotionally kind of like dissociated or over-controlled or over-perceiving threats or being reactive to threats. There's a sort of on-edge quality, which is consistent with the emotional arousal that you can see in both post-trauma and in narcissism. And most importantly, the exposure to trauma earlier in life can certainly heighten the likeliness of certain defenses and that personality structure of narcissism. Having invalidation consistently early in life, that's known to be a risk factor for developing a narcissistic personality. And while the vast majority of children exposed to this do not become narcissistic, some do. And the tunnel vision that post-trauma can result in, a sort of being disinterested in others, detachment, again, that could look or could be experienced by other people, like the selfishness we see in narcissism. But there's a lot of other stuff we see in narcissism, like the exploitativeness or taking advantage of other people, the callousness, the manipulation, the excessive need for admiration, the entitlement, the grandiosity, the arrogance. And those are not post-traumatic. Sure, certainly they may be part of the defenses that the narcissistic person uses to protect themselves. And yes, some of that could be part of that early life trauma, but the higher level manipulativeness and the ability to have those two repertoires and then selectively abusing people when others aren't observing? Not so much. I just needed to get that piece out of the way because here is the only thing that matters. The only question that we should be asking, which is, what is your experience in this relationship? How do you experience this person, their behavior? What happens when you give them feedback when you don't like something that's happening in the relationship? Do you feel safe? Do you feel like you can be yourself? That's it. Narcissistic, not narcissistic, just let that go for a minute. What is it like for you being with this person? And you may think, well, maybe that's a me thing. Maybe it's my past, my stuff. That's why I don't like being with this person. Maybe I'm the one who's jealous. Maybe I'm competitive. Maybe because I have low self-esteem. Folks, if you are digging that deep and are aware that this kind of stuff is what's making it difficult to be with this person, then you are very insightful. But in most cases, it's not that simple. Something else is happening. And if you can dig deep enough to determine there is something about that person and your experience of them that is unsettling or uncomfortable, and some of it may be in you, well, something else is likely coming from them. In general, if you are with someone who is very accomplished, but also agreeable and compassionate and empathic, you may still feel a little insecure around them, but acknowledge that you feel fine with them. I have a friend who kind of has life fully figured out. Her relationship's good, her kids are great, she looks well put together all the time, her house is clean, everyone in her family gets along. I love seeing her, but I have to say, after I spend time with her, I often feel like kind of a hot mess, and I do feel some shame after spending time with her, but I fully see that that shame is a me thing. And I don't judge my experience of her. I love being with her, but I recognize my history brings out that shame. Does that make sense? But that subtle stuff is not what this video is about. This is about people who are in relationships for a long time, not just one time or for a short period of time, but for a long time, that have been riddled with betrayals, deceit, invalidation, gaslighting, being taken advantage of. These are people who are not there for you in any consistent, meaningful way, but expect you to be there for them. So there's a real hypocrisy built into these relationships. Relationships in which the person is dismissive, arrogant, maybe snobby. The person is entitled and selfish all the time. This is who they are, and this is how it is. And above all else, if you could be fully and non-judgmentally honest with yourself, you don't like being with them. When you are with these folks, whatever the relationship is, you may find that you shut down, or you feel on edge, or you're always arguing, or it's kind of, prickly, or you always feel let down, or you're confused, or you're anxious. You don't feel good most of the time. Take a minute. Just take a minute. I don't give a damn if these people are narcissistic or not. That doesn't matter to me. I want you to take a minute. You can pause the video if you want. Take a minute and reflect on the people in your life that you don't like spending time with. Like I said, pause the video if you have to. Get a paper. Write down their initials. Reflect on that. What's going on? What is it that you don't like? How are you with them? How are they with you? Just turn that into a journaling exercise within this video. And if you pause the video, welcome back, because I did this little exercise too. And I listed a few people in my life that I feel this way about. And I have to say, when I look at my list, many of them were not narcissistic. Some of them kind of clearly are, at least in that neighborhood. But I don't like spending time with any of them. I sifted through the reasons I don't like spending time with them. They're selfish, they're mean, they're invalidating, they're dismissive, they're one-sided, they're abrupt, they're very, very, very sensitive. If you get one word wrong in a sentence, it's a mess. So you have to choose every word with surgical precision. There's some superiority complex stuff. So I feel chronically judged with them. And they're very dismissive of other people's opinions to a point of rudeness. They're cold, they're rigid, chronically negativistic. Everything is always terrible. They look for little ways to insult me or get in a dig, often in a passive-aggressive manner. It's not a picnic. Most of these people I've known for over a decade, a couple for only a few years. It is a lot of work to interact with them. I kind of have to psych myself up. It's not fun. It's not relaxing. I'm exhausted afterwards. I'm very guarded. For a variety of reasons, I'm at times obligated to talk to them. But in all but a few cases, there are things that I like well enough about them, or there are people that knit us together, or there's professional reasons. I do have to see these people. So I have to see these people on my little list. But heaven help me, if I could see each of them as infrequently as possible, I'd take it. I don't hate them. I don't even dislike them. I just don't like being with them. And I don't like me with them. Now, I'm lucky that the list of people I love being with is far longer. That's some good, healthy math to have in a life. So for me, Ramani, being with people where you feel like you can't make a mistake without it being a disaster, or where every word has to be measured. In essence, relationships where I have to be hyper-vigilant, where there is no back and forth, where I don't feel that what I say matters at all, where I'm always the butt of the joke. I don't like those relationships. And I don't seek these people out. Like I said, some of these are sort of professional relationships. It's very transactional. And I sort of dread when I need to turn to them or talk to them, but I have no choice. I keep it tight and I hold my breath like I'm taking medicine I don't want to take. I don't need to know whether or not they're narcissistic. It doesn't matter. I've spent enough time with them to know that I don't like spending time with them. And I don't need to make excuses for them. There are a few on the list that I recently decided that I'm going to sort of passively go no contact with. So in those cases, it was pretty bad. There are others I wish I never had to have contact with again, but I can't. And there are others on that list, and I'm sure it's the same for you, that I don't want to go no contact with. Strangely, I don't want to go no contact with them, but I just don't want to seek them out. But if I see them, I'll talk to them. Why does it matter if the word narcissistic fits or not? Some of you may think, well, this is a big ticket relationship. It's my mom, it's my husband, it's my sister. I need to know so I know what to do. You already know the relationship doesn't feel good, or you wouldn't be asking this question. Most of the time, right? Maybe sometimes it's okay or it's good, but you don't need the label narcissistic to look back over however many years you have been in this relationship and know that it has not changed. If anything, it probably got worse. So what you do is not get lost in the whole, are they narcissistic or not, but rather give yourself permission to move forward in a way that is simply informed by your experience with them. For most of you, I am guessing that you have tried to communicate repeatedly with the people on your list, or you have watched others try and it typically did not work. And that also means that growth or significant shifts are not possible. There's lots of good things about getting older, but I am older. And since I have known most of the people on my list for a pretty long time, I can say that none of them have improved. Most of them have gotten worse, and a few have largely stayed the same. I can hear you. You're saying, but the people on this little list of mine, they've been through stuff. They don't always mean it when they say these things. It's just how they are. Okay, so they aren't narcissistic. Maybe it's just an asshole. Maybe it's cultural. Okay. Maybe any or all of those are true. So what then? They've been through stuff. So what now? It's your burden to bear to have to manage their BS? Who assigned you that crappy job? Or when you say they don't mean it. Okay, if they don't mean it, so does that mean it doesn't affect you when they ignore you or make everything about them or tell you that you don't know what the hell you're talking about? Or maybe when you say, oh, they're just an asshole, so then what? Does that make it okay? As the narcissism megaverse gets more and more confusing, and there is, frankly, more and more shaming of folks who want to use this term, take back your power. Give yourself permission to say, okay, narcissistic, ADHD, PTSD, asshole, I don't like being with this person. And if you can't get out of it, work on your expectations. If you can get out of it, consider your options. We get so lost in the are they or aren't they narcissistic, and that maybe I'm a jerk for even thinking that we lose the plot. The basic idea that this is not a healthy person to spend time with, that you are not at your best with them. And then you can plan accordingly, minimize it, avoid it, disengage when possible, have realistic expectations, create a buffer afterwards so you can just release it. But acknowledge that time with them sucks. Not every asshole is narcissistic. And not every person who has narcissism has ADHD. And not all narcissistic people have histories of trauma. And not all neurodivergent people behave selfishly or unempathically. All we know in our relationships is ourselves. And this is why referencing to our experience of someone against someone else's experience of that same someone is actually tricky. Because when I think of my list of folks, well, some of the people on my list have very few friends or very few people in their life that like them. Others on that list of mine have lots of people in their lives that like them. So somebody likes them. And I have to account for my own stuff and baggage that I bring in to realize that, no, as far as me, I'm concerned, they're not easy. And that my stuff also doesn't mesh well with theirs, which is what makes it so difficult. And in the same breath, I know on my list of people that I really like and enjoy my experience with, that there are other people in the world that do not enjoy their experience with those folks. And it may even be the case that some of the folks on my like list might even be mildly narcissistic. This whole narcissism, psychopathy, sociopathy thing becomes very clear when we're at the extremes. When we're talking about a person who is physically violent or a major grifter or a serial cheater or a person who has another family that they didn't tell you about or empties your bank account. The unmistakable stuff. But everything else is pretty much foggy in these relationships. And the real lesson of all of this stuff is to look for patterns, to plug into yourself and be aware of what does and what doesn't work for you, because you have a backstory too. And then don't get lost in the are they or aren't they narcissistic, and then get confused by the video of the person who says that the narcissistic person who's yelling at you is just a person with ADHD who's looking for comfort. Be okay with the stuff that you experience as not okay. And then interact with it in a way that feels okay to you. And folks, if the person you're interacting with is indeed callous, entitled, grandiose, needs lots of admiration, is pathologically selfish, arrogant, and exploitative, takes advantage of you, I'm willing to take the bet that, yep, they're probably narcissistic. But even knowing that, at the end of the day, all that matters is your experience. In the past few months, past 6 months, I've spoken to a lot of audiences, big and small, about healing from narcissistic relationships. It's what I do. I've talked to groups of survivors. I've talked with groups of people who are not necessarily going through this, but they're curious about narcissism. I've talked with groups of therapists. I've talked with groups of even leaders, business leaders and other kinds of leaders who want to know more so that they can run their organizations better. Okay? And the question that has come up a few times is the hyper-intellectual question, the nonsense question of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin kind of question. You know, from like the probability question, like There must be life on other planets. I agree with that. And what they're trying to push is this idea of, you must be wrong, Dr. Ramani. We don't agree. You must be wrong. And their resistance is this idea that narcissism can't really change. Now, the question usually goes like this. They'll say, okay, you have a narcissistic person. Now, let's just say they go to great trauma therapy, and they go to great trauma therapy regularly. And then they see another specialist about medication. And then they see someone else about anger management support. And then they also do parts work. And they also get dialectical behavioral therapy. And maybe then they also get ketamine therapy. Then, Dr. Ramani, you have to tell me. Then, of course, it would change. And then, see, your premise that it doesn't really change would be wrong. And my response to that, when I'm in these unfortunate conversations, is, okay, I'll do this as a mental experiment. If a person had the time, the kind of time and money you're talking about, access to years of therapy, a treatment team, probably paying out of pocket, we're definitely close to 6 figures here, if not much more, and they had access to fantastic therapists, and they were motivated to stay in therapy, even when it gets uncomfortable, I'm like, yeah, absolutely, sure, there could be some change. But then I said, first, I'm still not convinced that the change would necessarily be sustainable. That's up to the fates, right? If the person's life takes a turn again, especially if they lose supply or face some other kind of life frustration, for example, their finances topple, they don't get their way in some part, somebody leaves a relationship, we're very likely to see some significant backsliding. And second, I'm not sure the kind of change they'd come up with would necessarily be enough for the people they hurt. And third, even if they had all the money and time and this army of highly skilled therapists and professionals, they would have to be willing to do the ongoing, vulnerable, and shame-evoking work of facing up to their behavior. So money, time, motivation, vulnerability, and still it may be a small change, and it may not be sustainable. After I say this, then the person who pushes this, well, it has to be able to change conversation with me, will usually cackle and say, ha! So you can admit that they can change. Honestly, at this point, I actually rarely leave the house anymore because I can't. I just can't with these damn conversations. Listen, I have, because this is what I do. I've worked with narcissistic clients, lots of them, and I've heard the anecdotal stories. The person who told me that her serially unfaithful, grandiose husband did go into therapy, explored his early history of trauma, and he actually stopped cheating. Now, he still gaslighted her about other stuff and was pretty dismissive and entitled, but he stopped cheating. And for her, that was enough. It may not be for someone else. But we aren't married to him, are we? Another person told me that her mother would do this sort of dramatic gesture of pretending to, lock her mouth with a key, like to show that she was staying silent about an issue that was usually a place where the mother would make a cruel or critical comment about her daughter's weight or her daughter's divorce. She said, you can see that she has to show me that she's willing to not say the thing and make the dramatic gesture. But this woman lived down the street from her mother. She was not in a position to easily end contact. She could definitely do without the theatrics, but said, at least, little Miss Locky at least keeps her mouth shut now. Another person may not be able to tolerate the theatrics. All of us are different. Personality is pretty tough to change. I've said that over and over here, right? Now, while in general, I don't know any therapists or even most people that would want to change a healthy personality, it would actually not even be easy to change a healthy personality. For example, make an agreeable person less agreeable. Again, tough to do. But frankly, the healthier the personality, the more flexible it is. It's like a body, right? The healthier a person's body is, their muscles, all of it, they're more flexible. They can move around. So that means that agreeable person can get their assertive on when it's needed, right? And they can learn to do that. Like they can learn to stand up to themselves, even though that's not their usual way, but when the heat's on, they'll do it. Now, the less healthy the personality, for example, antagonism, very unhealthy, narcissism, it's more rigid, so it's less flexible, and there's less likelihood to change, and there's less self-reflection, and so there's less incentive to change. I was even at an event where a woman kept pushing the question, pushing this, they can change. And it was getting to the point where I was losing my patience, which I don't tend to do, lose my patience. I ended up leaving the event early because I was so frustrated. And the woman actually got very sullen when I kind of held to what I was saying, what I knew to be true. The whole thing, though, made me really uncomfortable because this person sat at a table with many other people and they looked like they just ate a lemon the whole time and kind of fumed at the table at my answers to other people's questions. And as I said, I am just too worn out these days to sit around that kind of energy. I am 60 years old and I've been doing this stuff for a long time. And because I'm older and I've been doing this a while, I've seen cases that span decades. And I've also, in my own life, I've seen people I know reach the end of life. These patterns don't really change. In older adults, we may see a softening, and this is supported by the literature. It's possible that the older narcissistic person may become a little bit more docile as they become more dependent on other people from help, and they're not getting narcissistic supply from work. That competitiveness piece may be gone. But it's not always the case, and the meanness can certainly persist, especially in more severe older narcissistic people. But let me tell you, that woman wouldn't let it go, and I ended up leaving before they served the main course, which was a shame because I was hungry. Now, here's why I'm pissed off. I think this conversation about narcissistic change is complex for all the reasons. Like I said, when there's change, it's not always sustained. Whatever change happens, we as a therapist might notice it, but it may not be enough to still make their close relationships work or even repair existing relationships. Some of it relates to severity. The more severe the narcissism, the more malignant it is. Some with lower insight, lower empathy. Those kinds of more severe narcissisms are much less likely to change. Sometimes there needs to be a catalyst event for change. The narcissistic person's career blows up. Everybody they know stops speaking to them. They're caught in a public or at least a community kind of a scandal. Their third marriage ends. Their irresponsibility results in real harm to someone, right? So there's this catalyst event. And in the midst of that, for some narcissistic folks, especially at the less severe end of the spectrum, there can be the awakening moment that can result in some motivation to change. And in a small percentage of those cases, that sort of, called it a rock bottom moment, the person having enough awareness and some good therapists, there could be some change in the wake of that. But that's a lot of ifs, and we can't go creating catalyst situations in people's lives. This whole "don't tell me it can't change," Dr. Ramani part starts becoming a navel-gazing intellectual exercise. It also becomes a stuck point, and it almost becomes a point of defiance, as though people don't like the defeatist attitude that some people really can't change. But what gets lost in the shuffle of this intellectual exercise is the harm being done to people in the wake of these relationships. It's the age-old problem, right? That the world almost views the people who are stuck in these relationships as some kind of acceptable sacrifice, as we keep spinning around and trying to figure out how to fix the narcissistic people. Or that people get so lost in the, "oh, come on now, everyone can change if they want to. You can't give up on people." You can't give up on them, but you sure as hell can learn how they tick. And that what we've been doing in all these, again, navel-gazing conversations is we give up on the survivors who are stuck in devastating cycles. That's where our attention should be. So perhaps a narcissistic person with access to bottomless funds, an elite team of therapists, years of work, vulnerability, just enough healthy ego to work with, not at too severe a narcissism, and some catalyst event in their life for change, maybe we could see some shifts. And that in and of itself, just the money part alone, represents only a tiny proportion of people out there. And as these years pass, in these relationships, as you wait for this change to happen, the one thing I can guarantee you is that the people in these relationships continue to suffer and perhaps even feel guilty because they aren't on board the rah-rah support train for the narcissistic people who are trying so hard to change. Remember, the people suffering in these relationships rarely receive such support for their own struggles and feel guilty and are told by the world, well, you can't really complain about their behavior because they're trying. My point of view on this is I am 100% behind anyone who needs the help and is willing to do the work, getting access and encouragement to do the work, creating access for everyone to be able to do the work. What I'm not on board with, however, is expecting the people being hurt by people with narcissistic personalities, expecting all those people, the survivors, to put their lives on hold while they wait for what may or may not be enough change that may or may not ever happen, because this kind of heavy therapeutic support is not available to most people. That's the world we live in. So let me ask you a favor. If you ever meet me, please don't push the question, is change possible? Sure, change is possible. There's your answer. Is change probable? Probably not. So if we do meet, just say hi and don't push it. There's your answer. Thanks again.